Chapter 11 of Gray Lensman by E. Smith. Chapter 11. Although Kinnison left Bronseka, abandoning that line of attack completely, thereby, it might be thought, forfeiting all the work he had theretofore done upon it, the patrol was not idle, nor was Prelin Wimbledon of Comanche, the Boskonian regional director, neglected. Lensman after lensman came and went, unobtrusively, but grimly determined. There came Tellurians, Monarchians, Borovans, lensmen of every human breed, any of whom might have been, as far as the minions of Bosco knew, the one foe whom they had such good cause to fear. Regalian lensmen came also, and Poinian and Ardovics, representatives in fact of almost every available race possessing any type or kind of extrasensory perception, came to test out their skill and cunning. Even Warsaw of Valencia came, hurled for days his mighty mind against those screens, and departed. Whether or not business went on as usual, no one could say, but the patrol was certain of three things. First, that while the Boskonians might be destroying some of their records, they were moving none away by air, land, or tunnel. Second, that there was no doubt in any's willing mind that the lensmen were there to stay until they won, in one way or another. And third, that Prelin's life was not a happy one. And while his brothers of the lens were so efficiently pinch-hitting for him, even though they were at the same time trying to show him up and thereby win kudos for themselves, in mentally investing the regional stronghold of Boskone, Kinnison was establishing an identity as a wandering Hellion of the asteroid belts. There would be no slips this time. He would be a meteor miner in every particular, down to the least detail. To this end he selected his equipment with the most exacting care. It must be thoroughly adequate and dependable, but neither new nor of such outstanding quality or amount as to cause comment. His ship, a stubby, powerful space tug with an oversized airlock, was a used job. Hard used, too, some 10 years old. She was battered, pitted, and scarred, but it should be noted here, perhaps parenthetically, that when the technicians finished their rebuilding, she was actually as staunch as a battleship. Her space armor, Spaulding drills, delameters, tractors and pressers, and SPG, Prussian-specific gravity apparatus, were of the same grade. All bore unmistakable evidence of years of hard use, but all were in perfect working condition. In short, his outfit was exactly that which a successful meteor miner, even such a one as he was going to become, would be expected to own. He cut his own hair, and his whiskers too, with ordinary shears, as was good technique. He learned the polyglot of the trade, the language which, made up of words from each of hundreds of planetary tongues, was and is the everyday speech of human, or near-human, meteor miners wherever found. By near-human is meant a six-place classification of AA.AAAA, meaning erect, bifurcate, warm-blooded, oxygen-breathing, bilaterally duosymmetrical, and possessing eyes. For even in meteor mining, like has a tendency to run with, and especially to play with, like. Thus, warm-blooded oxygen breathers find neither welcome nor enjoyment in a pleasure resort operated by and for such a race, say, as the Trocanthers, who are cold-blooded, quasi-reptilian beings who abhor light of all kinds, and who breathe a gaseous mixture not only paralyzingly cold in temperature, but also chemically fatal to man. Above all, he had to learn how to drink strong liquors and how to take drugs, for he knew that no drink that had ever been distilled, and no drug, with the possible exception of thionite, could enslave the mind he then had. Thionite was out anyway. It was too scarce and too expensive for meteor miners. They simply didn't go for it. Hadive, heroin, opium, nitrolabe, bentlum. That was it, bentlum. He could get it anywhere, all over the galaxy, and it was very much in character. Easy to take, potent in results, and not as damaging, if you didn't become a real addict, to the system as most of the others. He would become a Bentlem eater. Bentlem, known also to the trade by such nicknames as Benny, Benweed, Happy Sleep, and others, is a shredded, moistly fibrous material of about the same consistency and texture as fine-cut chewing tobacco. Through his friends in narcotics, the Gray Lensman obtained a supply of the clear quill first chop in the original tins from a prominent bootlegger, and had it assayed for potency. The drinking problem required no thought. He could learn to drink, and apparently to like anything and everything that would pour. Meteor miners did. Therefore, coldly, deliberately, dispassionately, and with as complete a detachment as though he were calibrating a burette or analyzing an unknown solution, he set about the task. He determined his capacity as impersonally as though his physical body were a volumetric flask. He noted the effect of each measured increment of high-proof beverage and of habit-forming drug as precisely as though he were studying a chemical reaction in which he himself was not concerned save as a purely scientific observer. He detested the stuff. Every fiber of his being rebelled at the sensations evoked. The loss of coordination and control, the inflation, the aggrandizement, the falsity of values, the sheer hallucinations. Nevertheless, he went through with the whole program, even to the extent of complete physical helplessness for periods of widely varying duration, and when he had completed his researches, he was thoroughly well informed. He knew to a nicety, by feel, how much active principle he had taken, no matter how strong, how weak, or how adulterated the liquor or the drug had been. He knew to a fraction how much more he could take, or, having taken too much, almost exactly how long he would be incapacitated. He learned for himself what was already widely known, that it was better to get at least moderately illuminated before taking the drug, that Bentlem rides better on top of liquor than vice versa. He even determined roughly the rate of increase with practice of his tolerances. Then, and only then, did he begin working as a meteorite miner. Working in an asteroid belt of one solar system might have been enough, but the Gray Lensman took no chances at all of having his new identity traced back to its source. Therefore he worked and caroused in 5, approaching stepwise to the solar system of Borova, which was his goal. Arrived at last, he gave his chunky spaceboat the average velocity of an asteroid belt just outside the orbit of the 4th planet, shoved her down into it, turned on his Bergenholm, and went to work. His first job was to set up, to install in the extra-large airlock, already equipped with duplicate controls, his tools and equipment. He donned space armor, made sure that his delameters were sitting pretty. All meteor miners go armed as routine, and the Lensman had altogether too much at stake in any case to forego his accustomed weapons, pumped the air out of the lock back into the body of the ship, and opened the outer port. For meteor miners do not work inside their ships. It takes too much time to bring the metal in through the airlocks. It also wastes air, and air is precious, not only in money, although that is no minor item, but also because no small ship stocked for 6 weeks' run can carry any more air than is really needed. Set up, he studied his electrodes and flicked his tractor beams out to a passing fragment of metal, which flared up to him almost instantaneously. Or rather, the inertialess tugboat flashed across space to the comparatively tiny but inert bit of metal which he was about to investigate. With expert ease, Kinnison clamped the meteorite down and rammed into it his Spaulding drill, the tool which in one operation cuts out and polishes a cylindrical sample exactly 1 inch in diameter and exactly 1 inch long. Kinnison took the sample, placed it in the jaw of his Spee-Gee, and cut his berg. Going inert in an asteroid belt is dangerous business, but it is only one of the meteor miner's hazards, and it is necessary, for the torsiometer is the quickest and simplest means of determining the specific gravity of metal out in space, and no torsion instrument will work upon inertialess matter. He read the scale even as he turned on the berg. 7.9. Iron. Worthless. Big operators could use it. The asteroid belts had long since supplanted the mines of the worlds as sources of iron, but it wouldn't do him a bit of good. Therefore, tossing it aside, he speared another. Another, and another. Hour after hour, day after day, the back-breaking, lonely labor of the meteor miner. But very few of the bona fide miners had the Gray Lensman's physique or his stamina, and not one of them all had even a noteworthy fraction of his brain. And brain counts, even in meteor mining. Hence, Kinnison found pay metal, quite a few really good, although not phenomenally dense, pieces. Then, one day there happened a thing which, if it was not in actual fact premeditated, was as mathematically improbable almost as the formation of a planetary solar system, an occurrence that was to exemplify in startling and hideous fashion the doctrine of tooth and fang, which is the only law of the asteroid belts. 2 tractor beams seized at almost the same instant the same meteor. 2 ships flashing up to zone contact in the twinkling of an eye, the inoffensive meteor squarely between them. And in the airlock of the other tug, there were 2 men, not one. 2 men already going for their guns with the practiced ease of space-hardened veterans to whom the killing of a man was the veriest bagatelle. They must have been hijackers, killing and robbing as a business, Kinnison concluded afterward. Bona fide miners almost never work 2 to a boat, and the fact that they actually beat him to the draw, and yet were so slow in shooting, argued that they had not been taken by surprise, as had he. Indeed, the meteor itself, the bone of contention, might very well have been a bait. He could not follow his natural inclinations to let go, to let them have it. The tale would have been spread far and wide, branding him as a coward and a weakling. He would have had to kill, or been killed by, any number of lesser bullies who would have attacked him on sight. Nor could he have taken over their minds quickly enough to have averted death. 1, perhaps, but not 2. He was no Arisian. These thoughts, as has been intimated, occurred to him long afterward. During the actual event, there was no time to think at all. Instead, he acted automatically and instantaneously. Kinnison's hands flashed to the worn grips of his delameters, sliding them from the leather and bringing them to bear at the hip with one smoothly flowing motion that was a marvel of grace and speed. But fast as he was almost too late. 4 bolts of lightning blasted almost as one. The 2 desperadoes dropped, cold. The lensman felt a stab of agony sear through his shoulder, and the breath whistle out of his mouth and nose as his space suit collapsed. Gasping terribly for air that was no longer there, holding on to his senses doggedly and grimly, he made shift to close the outer door of the lock and to turn a valve. He did not lose consciousness quite, and as soon as he recovered the use of his muscles, he stripped off his suit and examined himself narrowly in a mirror. Eyes plenty bloodshot, nose bleeding copiously, ears bleeding but not too badly, drums not ruptured fortunately. He had been able to keep the pressure fairly well equalized. Felt like some internal bleeding, but he could see nothing really serious. He hadn't breathed space long enough to do any permanent damage, he guessed. Then, baring his shoulder, he treated the wound with Zen Master burn dressing. This was no trifle, but at that it wasn't so bad. No bone gone, it'd heal in 2 or 3 weeks. Lastly, he looked over his suit. If he'd only had his GP armor on, but that, of course, was out of the question. He had a spare suit, but he'd rather... Fine, he could replace the burn section easily enough. QX. He donned his other suit, re-entered the airlock, neutralized the screens, and crossed over, where he did exactly what any other meteor miner would have done. He divested the bloated corpses of their spacesuits and shoved them off into space. He then ransacked the ship, transferring from it to his own, as well as 4 heavy meteors, every other item of value which he could move, and which his vessel could hold. Then, inerting her, he gave her a couple of notches of drive and cut her loose, for so a real miner would have done. It was not compunction or scruple that would have prevented any miner from taking the ship, as well as the supplies. Ships were registered, and otherwise were too hot to be handled except by organized crime rings. As a matter of course, he tested the meteor which had been the innocent cause of all this strife, or had it been a bait, and found it worthless iron. Almost as routine, he kept on working. He had almost enough metal now, even at miners' rest prices, for a royal binge, but he couldn't go in until his shoulder was well. And a couple of weeks later, he got the shock of his life. He had brought in a meteor, a mighty big one, over 4 feet in its smallest diameter. He sampled it, and as soon as he cut the berg and flicked the sample experimentally from hand to hand, his skilled muscles told him that the metal was astoundingly dense. Heart racing, he locked the test piece into the speegee, and that vital organ almost stopped beating entirely as an indicator needle went up and up and up, stopping at a full 22, and the scale went only to 24. "Chronos, brazen hoofs and diamond-tipped horns," he ejaculated. He whistled stridently through his teeth, then measured his find as accurately as he could. Then, speaking aloud, "Just about 30,000 kilograms of something noticeably denser than pure platinum. 30 million credits, or I'm a Zabriskan Fontima's maiden aunt. What to do?" This find, as well it might, gave the Gray Lensman pause. It upset his calculations. It was unthinkable to take that meteor to such a fence's hideout as Miner's Rest. Men had been murdered and would be again for a thousandth of its value. No matter where he took it, there would be publicity galore, and that wouldn't do. If he called a patrol ship to take the white elephant off his hands, he might be seen, and he had put in too much work on this identity to jeopardize it. He would have to bury it, he guessed. He had maps of the system, and the 4th planet was close by. He cut off a chunk of a few pounds' weight and made a nugget, a tiny meteor, of it, then headed for the planet, a plainly visible disk some 15 degrees from the sun. He had a fairly large-scale chart of the system with notes. Borova 4 was uninhabited except by low forms of life and by outposts. Cold, atmosphere thin, good. That meant no clouds, no oceans, no volcanic activity. Very good. He'd look it over, and the first striking landmark he saw from 1 diameter out would be his cache. He circled the planet once at the equator, observing a formation of 5 mighty peaks arranged in a semicircle, cupped toward the world's north pole. He circled it again, seeing nothing as prominent and nothing else resembling it at all closely. Scanning his plate narrowly to be sure nothing was following him, he drove downward in a screaming dive toward the middle mountain. It was an extinct volcano, he discovered, with a level-floored crater more than 100 miles in diameter. Practically level, that is, except for a smaller cone which reared up in the center of that vast, desolate plain of craggy, tortured lava. Straight down into the cold vent of the inner one the lensman steered his ship, and in its exact center he dug a hole and buried his treasure. He then lifted his tugboat 50 feet and held her there, poised on her raving underjets, until the lava in the little crater again began sluggishly to flow, and thus to destroy all evidence of his visit. This detail attended to, he shot out into space and called Haines, to whom he reported in full. "I'll bring the meteor in when I come, or do you want to send someone out here after it? It belongs to the patrol, of course." "No, it doesn't, Kim. It belongs to you." "Huh? Isn't there a law that any discoveries made by any employees of the patrol belong to the patrol?" "Nothing as broad as that I know of. Certain scientific discoveries by scientists assigned to an exact research, yes. But you're forgetting again that you're an unattached lensman, and as such are accountable to no one in the universe. Even the 10% treasure trove law couldn't touch you. Besides, your meteor is not in that category, as you are its first owner, as far as we know. If you insist, I will mention it to the council. But I know in advance that the patrol can claim none of it, even if we wanted to, which we definitely do not." "UX, Chief, thanks." And the connection was broken. There, that was that. He had got rid of the white elephant, yet it wouldn't be wasted. If the Zwilniks got him, the patrol would dig it up. If he lived long enough to retire to a desk job, he wouldn't have to take any more of the patrol's money as long as he lived. Financially, he was all set. And physically, he was all set for his first real binge as a meteor miner. His shoulder and arm were as good as new. He had a lot of metal, enough so its proceeds would finance not only his next venture into space, but also a really royal celebration in any spaceman's resort, even the one he had already picked out. For the lensman had devoted a great deal of thought to that item. For his purpose, the bigger the resort, the better. The man he was after would not be a small operator, nor would he deal directly with such. Also, the big kingpins did not murder drugged miners for their ships and outfits, as the smaller ones sometimes did. The big ones realized that there were more long-pull profits in repeat business. Therefore, Kinnison set his course toward the great asteroid Euphrosyne and its festering hellhole, Miner's Rest. Miner's Rest, to all highly moral citizens, the disgrace not only of a solar system but of a sector, the very name of which was, and is, a byword and a hissing to the blue noses of twice 100 inhabited and civilized worlds. End of Chapter 11.